there is something quite unique about this prize in the way that people come together. There's a community feeling about it, and a friendship, and a quite profound sort of tribal feeling about it, which I think is part of the change it's made.
We kind of snuck in, and all we ever said was, this prize is going to be a breath of fresh air. We're not going to do it the same.
And the fantastic thing is you're trying to change people's reading habits, but all fun. I mean, the way it happens is you read good books and you work out who's the winner.
And Kate always talks about excellence and like a celebration of female excellence. And I think it will always be that, and it will always be fun, and it will always be exciting.
It's because of the Women's Prize that Brotherless Night is on so many shelves in so many stores, that so many book clubs read it, that people write to me and want to talk to me about it. Not only did Brotherless Night find more readers this year, but I think it will give the book a longer life in the world.
It's genuinely something that has changed the landscape for female authors.
Yeah.
Here we are 30 years later, having put thousands of books in the hands of tens of millions of readers the world over. What my lovely dad once said when I was talking about the Women's Prize and setting it up, and he said, oh, it's not against men at all, is it, darling? It's about getting a bigger table and more chairs.
It really was an explosion rather than a series of conversations that led to the prize. It was all to do with Angela Carter not being shortlisted for the Booker. And not only not being shortlisted, but the fact that it was a men-only shortlist attracted no comment whatsoever. And that was indicative of the culture of the time.
A group of us, men and women, said, can you imagine what would have happened if they had put out an all-female list? Everybody would have cried foul. They would have thought it was political. They would have said that it was deliberate. But because it was all men, people just assumed that that was what literature was like.
There was an agent at the time called Anne McDermott, and she invited us all round for a drink.
We got together in a flat in North London in 1992. There were about 45 of us, men and women, who worked in publishing, writers, literary agents, librarians, booksellers, a whole gang of people.
All very cross. Now, to give a context, the way we were all navigating the media at the time, which was very sexist, was really humour, that you'd laugh at sort of ridiculous behaviour, even when it involved being told, don't get in a lift with this author or this publisher because they're going to pinch your bum. So we did a lot of laughter, but actually laughter is a good defence. It didn't make you act, and we were all really angry about it, and that made us act and think about what can we do to change the culture.
There had been a sense of, yes, enough now, with the idea that writing is neutral, that literature is written somehow by neutral people. They all just happen to look like George Bernard Shaw, whereas women and everybody else look slightly different, and they're not in the gang, really. And we asked a few questions. First, does it matter? And if it does matter, why does it matter? And if it does matter, and we've worked out why it matters, then what are we going to do about it?
And that was the beginning of the Women's Prize.
And we came away from that meeting that was very jolly, saying, well, it does matter because literary prizes, when they are run with integrity and with passion, they keep books of quality on the shelf. And so that is important because we don't all read a book in the first 6 weeks it comes out. So out of that, we thought, well, what we will do is set up a prize that every year honours, celebrates and amplifies exceptional writing in English by women from all over the world. It was always global. It was always about, it didn't matter where you were born, what your nationality was, what genre you wrote in, what age you were. Nothing mattered except that you were a woman writing in English. And your book was beautiful and exquisite and brilliant and all of these things. And that's where it started. When we launched the prize at the London Book Fair back in 1996, I'm not very tall. And it was a lectern built for a man, clearly. And it was, I could barely be seen. And so everybody said, well, we're going to have to get her a box. So a box was fetched. And it was a cardboard box, and I stepped up in front of the world's press and all the rest of it and went through the box. So the very beginning was sort of like me going, hey, straight down through the box.
My particular fond memory dates to the first ever prize, which was 1996.
It was held in the Liberal Club in London, which meant that all of the guests, rather hilariously, had walked up stairs past whiskered gentlemen, not a woman in sight, in order to have the very first Women's Prize for Fiction. We didn't know who would come, because the campaign against the prize had been very vociferous. There'd been a lot of unpleasant writing in the newspapers and in the media, and I'd spent 5 months batting off attack, really. So we just didn't know who was going to turn up.
Late John Major, Tony Blair coming into view, and Cherie Blair came. She came into this room full of women, and I saw this terror on her face, because she didn't know anybody. So I went up and said, come with me, we'll stand with my author, Helen Dunmore. So she came and stood with Helen Dunmore, and then Helen won the prize. And it was like fairy dust.
And then I looked over to the corner and I saw Iris Murdoch. And it is the only time in my career that I have been too shy to go and introduce myself. Of course, later I learned that she was in the very early stages of the Alzheimer's that would obviously occupy the remainder of her life, and it was almost one of the last things she ever did. But I do remember standing in that room, very, very nervous before the ceremony started, thinking, if Iris Murdoch is here, it actually doesn't matter if no one else comes at all.
I was a journalist and I was working at Pride magazine. I was the music and arts editor there, and I was writing on books, so I was interviewing authors and writing book reviews. And I do remember that Leonie Ross's novel was longlisted for the Women's Prize. That's when I became aware of it.
I think I must have first heard about the Women's Prize as a pretty young writer. I remember when it was the Orange Prize and it was the Bailey's Prize. It has had so many different names, and it has always, in many ways, like stood for the same thing. You know, people here know what the Women's Prize is, respect it and value it, and appreciate the ways in which it has elevated literature by women, the ways in which it puts, you know, some books maybe that we wouldn't find in the US in the same way, puts us in conversation with those books and invites us to read them. It's part of a global conversation, I think. My first novel, Love Marriage, was published in the United States in the spring of 2008, and it was longlisted for the Women's Prize in 2009. And I hadn't realized I was eligible, and my British publisher must have sent me a quick note saying, you're longlisted for this prize. Do you want to talk to I think it might have been the BBC. They, of course, wanted to know how I felt, and I was thrilled and also slightly befuddled. Being part of that list really brought me to a readership that I'm sure would not have found me otherwise. And to feel not only that they loved the book, but that they understood it was really amazing.
2017 was a big year for us. We transitioned from being the Orange Prize for fiction to the Women's Prize. And that's where we are now. A registered charity, the Women's Prize Trust. And this allows us to, in addition to delivering the prize, deliver way more impact to all of the readers and writers that we can help. We can deliver books to those who need them in libraries or schools or women's refuges or prisons or hospitals. We can help writers at every stage in their journey, when they're just being inspired to write, to learning how to submit, to being mentored through their journey, to celebrating them when they actually get their book published and then perhaps nominated.
Well, it was a huge surprise to me to be shortlisted. I was so happy that I was longlisted. It was just such a huge honour. And then when I was shortlisted, I was just shocked because I had assumed that I wouldn't be shortlisted. I was on holiday in Devon at the time with my partner and my 2 children. I was looking forward to a quiet next few months of working on my next book. And then I got this message, this email saying that I had been shortlisted, and I was utterly shocked, and my life kind of exploded over the next few months. The Women's Prize is always such a kind of joyous experience, I think, whether you're a reader or a writer or a shortlistee. It was a few months full of kind of excitement and joy, and not really working on the book that I was supposed to be writing at the time.
Our first new project as a registered charity was Discoveries, really the idea of our executive director, Clare Shanahan. And it's a programme to cultivate the next generation of women writers. We want to help women to write their story, to submit them, to get them published, to find their confidence and find their voice. Thousands of women, all unpublished, unagented, applied. 16 women were longlisted. And now, in our 5th year, we have 7 books publishing that have gone through the Discoveries programme. I'm really thrilled by that. We had been talking about a Women's Prize for non-fiction for a while. We were pleased to be moving the dial for fiction, but we really thought we could do something similar for non-fiction too.
One of the broadsheet newspapers did a reading list for the new PM, whichever of the two it was going to be. One was a man, Rishi Sunak. The other was a woman, Liz Truss. 10 books that they should read. Not a single woman on either list. And I just thought this says everything, doesn't it? You know, the idea of women as experts. Don't believe women are experts. You know, we can talk about the menopause, we can talk about air fryers, we can talk about childcare, whatever, but the idea that a woman might be on that list.
When we started thinking about a Women's Prize for non-fiction, we worked with Nielsen to look at the data.
It really did come as a shock to all of us. We did this big research effort to try and get the stats on non-fiction in the UK. And when you look at the amount that's getting commissioned, the amount that's getting reviewed, the amount that people are getting for their books, be it men or women, the discrepancy between that, the pay gap, it is astonishing.
They were more or less taking 30% of the share, sometimes less. The gender pay gap is 36% and growing.
We have made so much progress on the fiction side. There's still so much to do. But non-fiction is astonishing. And unfortunately, it's because we're now in the world of experts and of geniuses. And we still live in a world that the expert, the genius, the top in their field is always a man. We think of it that way. And what came out of this research as well was that so many men who are very high up in their fields were saying, oh, the person who's the expert in this field is a woman. But she's not getting that book commission. She's not kind of getting this like persona around her as like, let me teach you all this stuff. And I think, especially as a woman in her 20s, men in their 20s read a lot of nonfiction, and I think it can kind of shape their identities, and they're not reading anything by women. So having this opportunity to put some of this incredible nonfiction by women out there is so important.
So it seemed like maybe this was the moment to launch a non-fiction prize, a sister prize that would do for non-fiction written by women what we had done for fiction written by women. The thing that was so different was this, that I think it was in February, it was cold, and I went out to do the media round, starting with the Today programme and finishing with the Andy Mars show. And I am not a weepy person. I am, despite everything, I travel hopefully. I'm still optimistic and idealistic. Every interview I did, I sat down, Today programme, Shal Hussein, everybody said this is a brilliant idea. And it was like, oh. So I was all ready to have the conversations I'd had 30 years ago about the prize for fiction, where everything was about defending the idea. This time, everything was about saying, this is a great idea. And it went on the whole day, everybody saying, yeah, this is absolutely what we need. And I finished, and I came out of Andrew Marr's studio, and I thought, well, who'd have thought it?
The inaugural winner of the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction in 2024 was Naomi Klein's Doppelganger, a fascinating, terrifying, compelling read. And the winner of the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2024 was Brotherless Night by Vivi Ganeshananthan.
Brotherless Night was a unanimous choice for the winner. It sat over 20 years of the Sri Lankan Civil War, but it's told from the perspective of women. It's very even-handed and clear-eyed about atrocities from both sides of the Civil War, and it is a masterpiece of historical fiction. I just couldn't put it down, and all of the judges had the same reaction. We were just bowled over by it.
My memories from last year are, they're not, I guess they're not a total blur, but pretty close. So I was thrilled that the book was longlisted. I spent about 2 decades writing the book. And one of the things that happens when you do that is that you have to tell yourself that the project is worth it to you, even if it isn't a success in the wider world. And you can't take that for granted. So to be longlisted was thrilling. I was amazed and impressed by the community, particularly of bookstagrammers who wanted to, read the whole long list and discuss it with each other, and the vibrant conversation of the literary world around this group of books that has such range, to be on a long list with writers I had hugely admired. And then last time around, my first novel was not on the shortlist. So I sort of, I was like, how does this work? I have no idea. And so to discover that I would get to go to London and, kind of be part of the celebration. And then, of course, winning was, I think I still don't totally believe that happened. I remember it was very cold and that the year before it had been very hot. And so I was wearing a dress and I was freezing. And I think we were all sort of cold. I kind of remember either Clare Kilroy or Isabel Ahmad having like a giant scarf. And me sort of wondering, I'm like, that scarf seems really, maybe it's a big enough for two scarf. I was so cold. And I was moving over to make room for whoever won, which I was sure would not be me. And then, astonishingly, they said Brotherless Night. I remember making a joke about my actual brother, who does have a pretty ridiculous number of jokes about the title of my novel.
People often say to me, well, how do you choose your judges? And we always had a very basic rule of thumb, which is if you were sitting next to this woman on the tube or at a dinner party or at a literary festival or whatever it was, and they said, I've just read this incredible novel, you've got to read it, would you go out and buy it? So that they would be women from all walks of life who had succeeded in many, many different ways, but they would always be women who stood with other women, who promoted other women.
So the judging process for the Women's Prize, it's really composed of three main stages. The first stage is where each of the judges are sent their allocation of books to read. So there's 2 judges on every book.
Each book is read by at least 2 judges, and that meant that it kept the reading down to about 70 or so titles. It means that you can properly get to grips, even though it's quite a feat to read all those titles. You can properly get to grips with each of them.
We spend about 6 months reading, and then we have a long listing meeting in February where we go through all of the books we've read, and the 2 judges that have read each book, they then present those books to the rest of the judges. And so the judges debate and talk about all the books that they've read and try and get down to a list of 16 books, and that takes a few hours, good few hours.
And then, of course, all of the judges go away and either read for the first time or reread those long list titles. And then there's more discussions online.
And then we have another meeting, which is the shortlisting meeting. And that's when we get down to 6 books. I mean, they're both really tough meetings, I think, because you're eliminating lots of books that you've read and liked. The shortlisting meeting is when you're really getting into the nitty-gritty of every single book, and there's the clashes between the judges who might want a certain book on the list and another judge doesn't think it deserves to be on the list. So there's lots of going to and fro, all in kind of a good-natured atmosphere.
And then a further judging meeting after reading the books yet again to produce the winner.
You are in this judging process with the most intelligent, diverse, amazing group.
It did feel quite overwhelming when the boxes would arrive and you work your way through one and then another box arrives.
I've always been a very voracious reader. Judging the Women's Prize challenged me a lot. I didn't expect it. I thought I was going to fly through it and it was going to be fine. It's a lot of reading.
It was very collegiate. We didn't have any fisticuffs, but we had lots of lively and passionate discussions, and I really enjoyed it.
There were definitely moments where it felt heated and argumentative, and it's intense, especially that long list to short list meeting is really intense and I think went on for a really long time, and maybe there was some tears shed.
It's a little bit stressful, but more than that, it was a joy. It was like a crash course in contemporary women's fiction.
Even when it's hard, there was a feeling of such excitement, like, I can't believe I get to do this. This is it's like being in the best university class of all time.
We're not just judging the books in themselves, it's about how they stand up against the other books and what the list as a whole is saying.
It was books I would never have read before. Like, I definitely realised that I had some gaps in my reading knowledge, so it was cool to be pushed to read different kinds of books.
It was a really enlightening experience, and also a wonderful opportunity to just read lots of books by women and to get a sense of what women are thinking about globally, the experimental leaps that we're taking in our writing. That was really satisfying to see. Yeah, on the whole, it's been a really valuable thing to do, I think, for me as a writer.
So every year when the Women's Prize is announced, we have a big summer party, and around that summer party we throw this festival called Women's Prize Live, where we have a number of talks and classes and panels from incredible female authors and people that work in the publishing industry, sort of taking you through it if you want to be a writer and you want to write your own story. And it's just this amazing week where you get to celebrate literature by women.
The Women's Prize ceremony is an iconic moment in the publishing calendar. It's known as the best party in publishing. The weather always cooperates. So far it has. It feels like a real celebration. There's plenty of champagne and canapes and a bit of tension leading up to the announcement.
When we were setting it up, all of us who were on the committee, as it was at the time, we all went and talked to people and we asked their advice. We asked publishers what they would like. We asked authors what they would like. And the best one was, one person said, "Don't make us sit through a big dinner, Kate. Just don't make us do it. It's awful. If you're up for the prize, you can't drink anything, you don't want to eat anything. You have to sit there for hours looking at the competition. And then when it's announced, after all that time, everybody else just buggers off and you're you're left either as the winner or not." And this was really significant because that meant that when we were setting it up, we said, okay, it's going to be a party. It's going to be a drinks party. We're going to do the announcement half an hour after the party starts, because then everybody will celebrate together. And that has been a real feature of the Women's Prize. Anybody who's ever come to the award ceremony will know that it's very rare for the shortlisted authors to leave if they don't win.
There is just this warm embrace, like, you know that everyone there wants to talk about books by women, wants to talk about books. It's like the dream book club you could ever imagine, and there is so much support, and all the authors who get nominated support each other. You really don't feel like there is this competitive air. It's a very competitive prize and you get a lot if you win, but there's just this kind of embrace and joy and celebration, and almost like, I can't believe we get to do this. I can't believe we all get to come here and just talk about our favourite books and listen to our favourite authors talk. It's like, it feels like the biggest treat in the world.
I want to make a suggestion about people wearing very big hats with their names on them. Because one of the things about authors is you really don't know what they look like. This would be true of men and women. And the idea that I might be at a party and Elizabeth Strout might be there and I might walk past her is just a horror. So she could be wearing a big cardboard box on her head with "I am Elizabeth Strout," possibly with an illustration of some of her book covers.
One of the important things about the Women's Prize Trust is that we're focusing on books written by women, but they're not just for women. We really want to make sure that all readers enjoy these books.
Despite everything, the idea that men are writing for everybody and women are writing for women still persists. I remember when I was setting up the prize, I did ask a very, very well-known male novelist, if he had read any books by women, and he said, of course. And I said, oh, who? And he said, Jane Austen. I said, yes, have you read any living women? And he hadn't.
So we launched the Men Reading Women campaign, intended to inspire men to pick up a book by a woman recommended by another man who wants to tell them that they loved that book and they wish other men would read it.
It was a wonderful way of creating an alternative library, because everything about the Women's Prize is about celebrating brilliant books by women and putting them in the hands of men, women, everybody.
How few books by women men instinctively buy and read is so sort of startling and in a funny way incomprehensible and not incomprehensible to me. I hadn't been walking into bookshops and saying, I must buy some books by men. Do you know what I mean? But there's some weird cultural thing going on. I was missing out on, as it were, half the sky.
There are structural issues that make men not read women, I think, to do with syllabuses at school. But I also think a lot of it is just oversight. I think a lot of men, if they were encouraged to read these books at a younger age or by other men as well, I think a lot of them would, like you, just realize like, oh my God, I love this author. I've just been missing out on this huge library of books that I love. And I think a lot of it just takes a little push. That's why it's such an exciting campaign, because a lot of it isn't like this aggressive, I will never read a book by a woman. It's just like, oh, that's the only thing I've ever been recommended, or it was on my school syllabus, or when I go into a bookshop, those are the books that, you know, if I ask the clerk, like, I think it's a lot of it is just can kind of slip under the radar.
Books are like having an incredible conversation with a really interesting, wise person who expresses themselves beautifully. So I started enjoying the texture of the experience more than the kind of journey of the experience. I think I always thought, you know, who died, what's going to happen? And now I think, oh my God, I get to spend 20 hours with Anne Tyler telling me about the world. So I think I started to really appreciate the texture of books and the world that they conjured up. Once in a while, a book by a man slips through the net now. But since I started, you know, I read these sort of 60 books by women in a row as a kind of intellectual experiment. And now all my favorite writers of the moment are women. So as it were, when you say, well, I have to read the next book by Anne Tyler, by Anne Patchett, by Sally Rooney, by Elizabeth Strout, there's not much room for other people. So the Women's Prize has sort of pushed me in the direction of a whole world where I sense a kind of, dare I say, slightly richer humanity that's more to my taste.
The Women's Prize turns 30 this year. I'm 30. I've always lived in a world with the Women's Prize, but to know from Kate why she started it and how much this prize was actually needed and how much has changed in terms of the percentage of women on these prize lists, the percentage of women who are being reviewed, who are being, you know, put in bookshops like this. It's not just a frivolous thing. It's genuinely something that has changed the landscape for female authors.
Yeah.
The percentage of women in the top 500 best-selling fiction books has moved from 38% in 1998 to 57% in 2024. The average sales uplift in the weeks following the announcements are in the hundreds of percent. And it's significant to their ongoing career. We've heard from the authors that this sets them up for the rest of their writing life.
On the other side, the state of the world, as a feminist of my generation, if you had told me 30 years ago we'd be in the situation we are for women's rights being rolled back all over the world, I wouldn't have believed you.
As much as I think it's urgent to continue reading, and reading itself is under attack, obviously it's urgent to read from a woman's point of view. And in some parts of the world, women are suffering, they are degraded, they are not allowed access to culture. That makes it even more urgent.
Women's fiction and nonfiction could not be more urgent than they are right now in a world that is increasingly seeking to marginalize women, to diminish their rights, to police our bodies, our space, our art, to try to regulate our conversations with each other, or the parameters of where we can have those conversations, the kind of education that we have access to. And so to have a prize that makes as much space for women as possible is vital in the current environment.
Books matter, even more than they ever did. Because will a novel stop a war? No. Can writers roll back the big tides of history? No. But can we keep shining a light on hope? Can we keep putting underrepresented and underheard women's voices into the mainstream and saying, these are the alternatives, it doesn't have to be like this? Yes.
I love the fact that, you know, it's been 30 years of the Women's Prize, and you kind of have to get excited of 30 years from now, because I think what you hope now is that there will be really famous books that you'd feel like a fool, man or woman, not to have read. And that's what the prize is doing.
We deliver access to books to those who need it. We work with the RNIB to ensure that those with vision impairment can also enjoy the books. We work with libraries so that they can have materials to support reading groups and to support their community through things like our podcasts and our events. We want to make sure that women who might want to be a writer but never thought they were able to can access the information that they need to think about writing their book. We find them, we mentor them, we put them in a community with their peers so they can support one another. And then we celebrate them wherever they are on their journey. We're going to do everything that we've been doing while we still need to do it. And we have lots and lots of ideas and ambitions for the future. We're not going to stop until you don't need us anymore. We've got plans for 26, 27, 28 and beyond.
30 years is a great opportunity to look back and see everything that's been accomplished. It's also a great opportunity to look forward and to continue to make change. So the prize for non-fiction is fairly new. This year there's a prize for achievement, and on we go with ever changing and evolving things that celebrate women and writing.
My hope for the Women's Prize in 30 years is that someone will need to launch a men's prize, because when you say literature, all you'll think is books by women. You'll be like, oh God, I always forget men write books too. We should really be lifting them up. It's very hard for them to have a space.
And all the men will start only using initials so that people might think they're women.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
Do you know how old I am? To give me a break. It will always be the gold standard. You will always know that if a book is longlisted or shortlisted for the Women's Prize, that it's worth reading. And I am absolutely sure that whatever else is happening with the prize, whatever different directions it's taken, whatever other brilliant campaigns it's doing, I will still be, like everybody else, waiting for that shortlist to be announced so that I can choose my reading for the next couple of months. I was given a brilliant bit of advice when I was first starting out by the great lawyer Helena Kennedy. And she said to me, if you can't do something, Kate, never put the phone down without recommending another woman. And that's how you build a community. And what the Women's Prize has done for more than 30 years now is build a community of women who support one another, who are there when times are tough, but are also there cheerleading. Because that is the most important thing about the Women's Prize, that it's built on celebration. And we must pass that down. We must keep doing the same thing.